Okay, well, thank you everybody for joining us today. Appreciate everybody taking time out of their busy schedules. We've got Tom is joining me today, and he's going to go over a couple of new items. We've been busy expanding our product offering. Hopefully everybody's seen that and received some communications on it. So we've got another new gateway and a switch to go with it. So that is exciting. As we go along, if you have any questions, please put those in the question and answer section, excuse me, and we'll address those at the end. But with that, I will turn it over to Tom.
Very good. Thank you, Corey. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone. And as Corey said, thank you very much for joining us for this webinar. We've been on a new product kick for some months now, and this is just the latest version, I guess, or the latest issue. So let's see, what am I going to be, or what are we going to be talking about today? These two new products that I'm going to talk about are distinguished from the others in that they're the first up-level products to have 10 gigabit Ethernet ports. And so, as Corey mentioned, there's a gateway and a switch, and I'll describe them in a little bit. To also talk about our roadmap going forward for incorporating additional hardware products into it and how all these new products fit into the landscape. And then at the end, I'll try and not blather on too long, so we have plenty of time for questions. All right, so the first question is, why are we doing 10 gigabit Ethernet, given that we're in the small business market? So far we've been focused pretty much on offices with less than 100 employees, and it's easy to observe that there's not a whole lot of demand for 10 gigabit in offices of that size, because generally those offices are very constrained by their ISP bandwidth, the WAN bandwidths, and they have fairly simple application requirements. So most of their stuff is cloud applications. I mean, if you're doing QuickBooks online or even QuickBooks on premises, it's not like that's going to eat up a 10 gigabit pipe. So there's not a whole lot of data transfer on the LAN. Most of it is cloud-based. But we are now moving up into the space that has more than 100 users per office. We have some customers now with 400 people in one building. And so for those, we introduced new gateways that we talked about last time, which is the UG206 and the 208. And so in those scenarios, as we all well know, if it get considerably above 100 employees, then now 10 gig architectures start making sense. And so 10 gig is not just a matter of increasing the size of the pipe. You can't just go from 1 gig to 10 gig. You also have to have more powerful switch fabrics. You have to have more fan out. You end up with full 1 gig symmetric fiber links for your WAN, all kinds of stuff like that. So it's almost a complete upgrade of the entire architecture and not just the Ethernet physical links. Before I dive into what we're doing product-wise, I thought I would spend a little time on where 10 gig would fit in a small business as far as we would see things. 10 gig doesn't necessarily make sense for all small business. In fact, I would say the vast majority of small businesses, 10 gig is pretty much way overkill. Typically, you'd use 10 gig when there's a lot of LAN data. So there's, for example, large servers on premises especially with data-hungry applications, stuff like lots of files being transferred back and forth. Video editing is a classic case. If you're seeing cases where you need to have high throughput between VLANs, then yes, 10 gig starts making sense. But most importantly, it has to be a well-designed network. You can't just have a random mess of switches like that little picture on the bottom and expect 10 gig to do anything, because you're going to find bottlenecks up and down the chain. But if you have a reasonably flat, well-structured network, servers are identified, connected correctly, switches identified, connected in a proper tree, then 10 gig starts making sense. 10 gig doesn't do much for you at all when most of the applications are in the cloud, which is what a lot of small businesses are moving UG202 these days. Like I said, QuickBooks Online, forget 10 gig. Amazon or Intuit is the one that needs to build a 10 gig infrastructure. The small business just needs to stay within the constraints of their ISP. Also, things like databases, so which are CPU heavy but don't consume much network bandwidth. That's not really much of a 10 gig application. So there are definite cases where there are 10 gig links that are useful, and then there is a whole lot of cases where 10 gig links won't do anything observable. All right. But with that, given that there are 10 gig applications and customers requiring that we are getting into, these are our first two products that support 10 gig links. So there's a gateway and a matching switch. The gateway we refer to as the UG207, and it's basically a variation of our UG206 gateway, but with dual 10 gig SFP links included. And the switch is the new line of switches. We refer to it as the 200 series switches. The first product in that line is a 24-port switch with 4 10 gig SFP plus links. The rest of the product, the firmware, the features, the portal views, everything is exactly the same as the rest of the Uplevel product family. So you can actually mix and match these with existing Uplevel products, and they will talk to each other, they will interwork with each other, they'll appear on the portal just like each other, and so on and so forth. What is different is that they have 10 gig uplinks and downlinks. This is what the UG207 looks like. You notice it looks just like the UG206, but there's 2 SFP plus ports added on. Some details about the 207. So it has a total of 8 ports, of which 2 of them are 10 gig SFP plus. The SFP plus ports, by the way, on the 207 can handle both 10 gig and 1 gig. So you can plug in either kind of SFP module, and the system will automatically detect it and adjust to the module inserted. So of course it handles fiber, copper, pretty much any standard SFP module plugs in. The throughput is very similar to that of a 206 in terms of IDS IPS, in terms of VPN, and so on. And the capacity in terms of users is also very similar to the 206. Storage options, this one has dual drives, so it can support RAID 1 in 1, 4, and 8 terabytes, all using SATA 3 SSDs for performance. And in terms of its size, it's actually very similar in size to our 24-port switches. You know, of course, it all fits in one rack unit, but it fits, basically, it's a very similar size to the 206. All right. Now moving to the switch. The switch looks like this. Again, it's actually very similar to our existing 24-port switch, except that from the front panel view, the 1 gig SFPs replaced with 10 gig SFPs, and the internal switch fabric got a complete revamp. So obviously you can't have a 24-port 1 gig SFP switch with the same switch fabric as a 10 gig SFP switch. So in terms of the various details, like I said, it's got 4 10 gig SFP plus ports. Again, those SFP plus, so they can handle both 10 gigabit and 1 gigabit. Oops, I think there's actually an error on this slide. It looks like I went back. There we go. Sorry. Going back to the 207 is a bad way to describe the switch. All right, there are 22 copper LAN ports and 2 uplink ports, also copper, and 4 SFP ports, one of which is an uplink, and the remaining 3 are LAN or downlink ports. Again, same principle as the 207, the SFP plus ports can handle both 10 gig and 1 gig SFPs, and so you can just plug them in and they'll automatically detect and handle. The switch fabric backplane is completely non-blocking, so it'll do 64 in, 64 out, which means every port can be loaded to max. There's no packet loss. And of course, this is a PoE plus switch, so it handles .11at PoE on all the copper LAN ports, and with the total power budget of over 400 watts, you can plug an AP on every single port and it will be happy. In terms of switching, it's pretty much the same capabilities as the rest of the Uplevel switch family. It's managed completely from the switch controller inside our gateways. It provides all the VLAN isolation, all the PoE control, everything that the existing switch family has. So it handles all the layer 2, and it's actually layer 2 plus. So it works with our gateways to do the inter-VLAN routing and everything. Physical, it looks very similar to the 206 and 207. It's one rack unit, and of course, you can plug it into a standard 19-inch rack, one rack unit. Okay, so given the introduction of the 207, the gateway landscape covers everything from a tiny fanless box that you can place in somebody's house, all the way to a 208, which we have actually got. Some deployments. I think, we have actually got something like 400 users on a 2.8 at present, and then everything in between. So you have the standard 101 workhorse. You have the 206, which is starting to gain quite a bit of traction. Then the 207, which just got introduced, and then the 2.8. So you can scale to pretty much any size of SMB in this range. I mentioned roadmap. So we are actually working on a line of 10 gigabit switches. So this is only the very first switch in the range. So we have a 24-port switch, which seemed to make the most sense from a middle of the line switch that everyone could use. But in addition to that, we're working on an aggregation switch. So when you start having a true 10 gig architecture, then you start needing to bundle or to aggregate switch trunks together. So there's a 12-port 10 gig aggregation switch in the works. And of course, we have 48-port switches in the 1 gig family. So adding 48 ports in the 10 gig family is a no-brainer. And we do have APs on the horizon with 2.5 gig copper ports. And so those would be Wi-Fi 6 APs with enough bandwidth to saturate beyond a 1 gig pipe. So they have 2.5 gig links. And so we have plans for a 24-port switch with 2.5 gig copper. And so on. So development at Uplevel never stops. We just listen to our partners, and we keep introducing new products as they come up with customer requirements. All right, so to conclude, before we move on to questions, so we have added more gateways and switches now. We'll keep doing this. But the objective is to make it easier to pick the right gateway for your customer needs. And the thing to keep in mind is that this is a subscription model. You don't have to be locked into any one gateway. If, for example, you have a customer, an existing, say, a 101 gateway that has overgrown it beyond its capacities, there's no reason why you can't substitute a 206 or a 207 and move up without having to, change out the rest of the infrastructure or make a big purchase. The 10 gig product line is intended to handle things like high power servers, start building out switch aggregation trunks, all that kind of stuff. And Corey and I are always here to help if you have a layout or a proposal or something you need to work on and need some advice, even if it doesn't include Uplevel, give us a call. We are there for you. Okay, with that, I will conclude and turn it over to everyone for questions. Over to you, Corey.
All right, we do have a couple of questions already. I think we answered the first one. Does the ULS202 24-port offer PoE? And I think we did address that, but I'll let you readdress it.
Yes, certainly. Right. Every single one of our switches does PoE just because it makes it much more convenient for our partners to just not have to think about it. So in almost all cases, they can handle APs or cameras on every port. Again, make it convenient, don't have to think about it. Just like that, the 10 gig switch does offer PoE. All 22 ports of LAN ports are PoE plus, which means they handle up to 30 watts of power per port. And you can plug in a moderately power-consuming device like an access point that consumes no more than about 10 watts or so into every port. So you won't get close to the 400-watt capacity of the switch.
Okay. Next question is, can the 207 support more than 200 users?
Well, the 200 users is more or less a recommendation based on what we see in terms of the typical performance and the typical users, but the actual number is extremely dependent upon the customer. If you've got a lot of customers who mostly do web browsing, a lot of customers, a lot of employees that do mostly web browsing, or they're sitting in some sort of multi-tenant unit or something, then sure, you can certainly handle more. We have, for example, customers using the 101 that have considerably in excess of 100 users, and it's situation dependent. Our recommendation of 200 is just based on, we are fairly confident you can comfortably handle that, but if you need to put more, give us a call and we'll sort it out.
Okay. Lead time and availability of the 207. Well, probably both of them, 207 and 208, or 202, excuse me.
202, yes. For both, availability is right now. Lead time is probably measured in weeks as opposed to, it's less than weeks. We have already shipped our first 207s and gearing up production. The 202, again, very similar, available right now. And I think the manufacturers assured us that we have stocks available whenever we need to. So, but again, these are new products. I would say, give us a call if you have something urgent, and we will do everything we can to make sure you get your products on time.
Do we happen to have any kind of a time frame for when we might see a 48 port or an 8-port version of those switches?
Good question. The engineering team is certainly busy on a bunch of software things and some new Wi-Fi 6 AP developments and so on. So, but definitely sometime in the next 2 quarters, I would say, well before the end of the year. So it doesn't take a whole lot of time. The manufacturer has been kind enough to make it, make the boards reasonably firmware compatible across the board. So it doesn't take a whole lot of time for us to get our software up and running, but it does take some time. So I would say it is driven a lot by demand. So far, we've introduced the 24 port, but if there's a lot of people that pop up and say, we want a 48 port, then you can bet that that's going to move up in the R&D priority. But yes, definitely before the end of the year is our target.
Okay. This one is not necessarily related to these two products, but can we update the website or potentially the portal to show renewal dates instead of just on the invoice?
Oh, yes, that actually, I vaguely remember that did come up. And so that's, I guess that is definitely something we want to do. We are working on revamping the website. There's a bunch of things we want to do to the website. So this will be something that has come up more than once and something we want to do. The key, I think, is just revamp the website without actually destroying it completely. So
okay,
navigate that. It's a very marketing-oriented question. But yes, that has come up. That's on the list of things that we want our website developer to do as and when we find one that's reliable.
The next one's not really a question from Carlos. I can answer this one. Are we planning on attending the Computer Troubleshooters Conference in Pittsburgh? We're having those discussions. We'd like to be there. We're still efforting that, Carlos. So
we'd love to meet a lot of people there. We know so many people that we would be able to meet.
Some great partners. Okay, let me see. I've got a couple more that have been sent in. make sure that we get these all. So should customers with a 206 consider moving to a 207?
As I have often said, my general rule of thumb is if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So I wouldn't say that just because the 207 is there, that it merits an immediate bump to from the 206 to the 207. But that being said, if you're noticing that there's a lot of inter-VLAN traffic, or there's a server that just seems to be stopped, yes, I would say that you should consider it. I don't say that you should automatically do it. I think I would say it's on a case-by-case basis.
Okay.
I'd be happy to work through anyone who wants, me to take a look at it.
All right. The next one is, what kind of 10G SFP modules do you recommend?
We've tested this with several different ones. They're all fairly inexpensive, so they're fairly easy to test. The ones we've had good success with are the TP-Link modules, and then we have something that came out, I think it was 10G Tech, I believe. And so we've tested with both fiber, copper, and 1 gig and 10 gig, and they all seem to work just fine. We haven't really found any compatibility issues. I mean, the TP-Links we just commonly use in an engineering lab. They're a good cross between reliability and cost. That being said, we haven't found any compatibility issues, as I said. So pretty much most standard 10 gig SFP links should be just fine.
Okay. Will the new switch work with existing products?
Yes. Obviously, the existing switches don't have 10 gig links, so you can't just plug the 10 gig link into it unless you have a 10 gig copper link and it auto-negotiates. But that being said, you can take the uplink copper, for example, on the 10 gig switch and connect it to one of the existing 1 gig LAN ports, and it'll be fine. Now, why you'd want to connect a 10 gig switch to a 1 gig switch is beyond me, but they will interwork, they will show up in the portal, they will do their, they will switch traffic, they'll be just fine and happy.
Okay, and then the last one that I've got is, will the 10G switches, will third-party 10G switches work with the 207?
Yes, there should be absolutely no reason why any standard third-party 10 gig switch could not be just plugged into the 10 gig downlinks of the 207, and in fact, you could even plug them into the 10 gig downlinks of the 202. As with any other third-party switch, the only thing we have is just don't put the third-party switch between like the 202 and the 207, because that just the third-party switches, especially 10 gig switches, will block all of the all of the LLDP packets and the discovery packets and the VLAN stuff, and it just becomes a pain to set up. You can make it work, but it's a pain.
Okay. So those are the questions that I've got so far. Does anybody have any additional questions or anything before we wrap up for the afternoon? Give it just a quick minute here.
I think we like short and sweet webinars.
Yep. Well, right to the point on this one. So, okay, well, I think that is everything for today. As you can see on the screen, and my email and phone number, as well as sales and support. But if you do have any questions, or if anything does cross your desk that you need some help on, please do not hesitate to give us a call. And again, thank you everybody for taking some time to join us today. We'll make this recording available here in just a couple of days to review. So with that, we'll let everybody go and have a great afternoon.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.